Morning, everybody. A friend said to me recently, John, I look forward to spending time with you after lockdown. Then he paused and added, that is, if in the meantime the Lord spares you. Now, what is that meant to mean? I could have told him the Lord has spared me since day one of my life. I didn't expect God to stop or to start sparing me. But he'd better pray that God spares him for what was clearly, blatantly, an ageist comment. Implication, he saw me as having 1 3/4 feet in the grave already. On the 1st of March this year, it seems a lifetime ago, we had Arne Skagen ministering into this church. He has an international and supernatural ministry, known, loved, honored, and used of God in different countries in the world. And he was telling us on the Sunday evening how in 2019, last year, the Good Shepherd had in effect made him to lie down in green pastures beside still waters because he lost a measure of his health. Now, there are times when Jesus can ask us that searching question, do you love me, or do you love the intoxication of being used by me? We all want greater fruitfulness in our lives, and sometimes the answer is not more activity, it's more intimacy. We reflected on Mary of Bethany, misunderstood and criticized for it, but she seized her opportunity to sit at the feet of Jesus, to gaze into his eyes and drink in his words. We're not surprised that it was Mary of the two sisters who came to know and understand Jesus best and love him most. It was Mary, and again she was misunderstood and criticized, but it was Mary who broke that alabaster jar and poured that precious ointment all over Jesus. We're told that the fragrance of it filled the house, and it still lingers when we read the story. Within a few short weeks of Arne's visit to us, many of us, probably most of us, were also made to lie down in green pastures beside still waters. Sheep can't drink from fast-flowing streams because much of our activity was taken out of our lives. And we had that precious opportunity to sit at the feet of Jesus ourselves, much more than we previously did, to bask and bathe into his presence. And the more we do that, the more our heart will burn within us. Now, I want to just look today at one facet of the diamond of truth. My text is in the story of the vine and the branches, and it's John 15 and verse 11. And Jesus told them this, he said, that his joy might be in us. He says, I tell you this, that my joy may be in you, that your joy may be complete. My joy in us. That takes some thinking about. Remember that Jesus was, in fact, a man of joy. Yes, he was a man of sorrows in season, but predominantly a man of joy. Hebrews 1 and 9 tells us, quoting from the psalmist, that God anointed him with the oil of joy and the oil of gladness above his fellows. He was, in fact, the most joyful and the most joyous person alive on the planet. And because of that, he was fun to be with. Joy is attractive and infectious. Laughter is magnetic. Children would have been drawn to Jesus, not just by instinct. And when they grew close, perhaps they didn't see the laughter lines beside his eyes, but they saw the twinkle in his eyes. And this joy, says Jesus, will come our joy. Now we know that in his presence is a fullness of joy that nothing else can touch. He's fun to be with, but also he's exciting to be with. And this morning, what I'd like us to do in our imaginations is just pretend that we are one of his close disciples for a day or two. We will walk with him. We will enjoy his companionship, yes, and amazingly, he will enjoy our companionship. We will see him encounter one or two people. And to this day, we never grow tired of seeing God transform lives, whether gradually or dramatically. We'll only have time for just one or two encounters. John, at the end of his gospel, said many other things did Jesus do which are not recorded here. If they were all written down, I don't think the world would be big enough to contain all the books which would be needed. You may have been a pupil of mine, and if so, you may or probably may not realize that's an example of hyperbole, where we get our word hype. It's an over-exaggeration for the point of emphasis. But we do know this as his close disciple, that every day will start with an expectation, an anticipation, an excitement. Every day is likely to be a roller coaster, and we have no idea what we're going to take part in or see. Take the leper who approached Jesus. That was startling in itself. Lepers know all about social distancing before we knew the term. Perhaps they had to ring a bell to warn people off. Maybe just the sight of them or the stench from them was enough. But Jesus was standing there, and this leper came right up and invaded his space. And Jesus did not take 2 steps backwards. And when the man knelt before him and asked for his healing, sharp intake of breath from us at that moment, because Jesus, with his fingers, reached out and touched this man's corrupting skin. And then there's a metamorphosis in front of our eyes. We can hardly believe it. His skin is changing in texture and in color. The whole appearance of the man is altering before our eyes. We know what he did. It doesn't tell us, but we know what he did. He looked at the only skin readily available. He looked at his own hands. And as he looked at his hands, he recognized that his fingers were now fully formed. There'd been a creative miracle. He had feeling in his fingertips, amazing. And his skin. When Naaman, the Syrian general, was cured of God of his leprosy, that man's hands calloused through years of holding shield and sword and spear, and then eaten away by leprosy. But when he was healed, it says that his skin was soft and tender, like a little child. And then I believe the leper would have turned his hands over and seen that he had 10 perfectly formed nails. And then maybe he reached up and felt his nose and realized it was perfectly shaped again. Now we're watching while he's looking at his hands, we're watching his face. Such amazement and wonder, such gratitude. Remember, he'd been a dead man walking. He was in a condemned cell, and Jesus came in and led him out and threw the key away and walked him off death row. He was a pariah, an outcast, but now he was socially acceptable. Now he could worship in the temple. Now he could go to be with his family. Now he could hug people. So much joy, overflowing, radiant joy, and we're sharing it. Or maybe the man who was carried in a mat, not dignified, carried in a mat and lowered at the feet of Jesus. We know the story of those 4 friends of his. He was a man who was a prisoner. He was in the strong, deep captivity of a body which refused to work, limbs hanging loosely and uselessly. He depended on others every day for his mere existence. And he's lying there on the floor looking up to Jesus. And Jesus says, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk out of this place." And we stop breathing at that moment. And whether he felt a tingling or warmth in his limbs, maybe as the brittle bones and the atrophied muscles were strengthening, the tendons, the ligaments, we don't know what he felt. But his brain sent a message down to his legs, and his legs responded, and maybe with a bit of help for balance. He's standing there, and before he walks out with his mat, we are watching and listening to his 4 friends. We're listening to their acclamation, to their whooping. We're watching their high-fiving, their back-slapping. They were ecstatic. It was party time, and we're enjoying the party and sharing the joy of that occasion. But what about that man with the withered, shriveled, useless hand? It was his right hand. So everything he had to do with his left hand, probably the weaker hand. Maybe he kept it hidden because he felt self-conscious about it. I would have done. Discomforted maybe when Jesus said, "Now stand up and come to the front of the synagogue." And then Jesus said, "Stretch out that hand." And he did. When the God of the impossible bids us to do the impossible, we can do it. And then he's holding two hands in front of them, identical, and maybe just clenching his fist and unclenching his fist. And again, we're looking at his eyes and his face, and we see the wonder, and we see the gratitude. He was whole again, he was a man, and we see the glowing joy. Or that dear lady, 18 years, bound by a spirit of infirmity. Yes, she was stooped, bent double. Her horizon was the ground beneath her feet. And Jesus asked her to come forth, 18 years in that crippled condition. And he lays his hands upon her. And inch by inch, she straightens and she straightens. And then she's standing tall on the inside as well as the outside. She can look people in the eyes. She can look up to the sky. And you know what happened? All the gratitude and the wonder and all that joy poured out in praise to her God. Or remember the lady who came, the one with the daughter. She was a Canaanite lady. She sought Jesus out. She would not take no for an answer. And he tested her faith to strengthen her faith. It does not say in the Bible that her daughter was troubled by an evil spirit, tormented, tortured by an evil spirit. There was hell on earth in that home, hell on earth for the girl and hell on earth for the mother who couldn't help the girl. And Jesus said, your faith is rewarded. And she's up. She'd left the girl at home. She doesn't walk or saunter back home. She skips or runs. She wishes she could fly. She bursts in the house. There's the girl lying on the bed and one look in her eyes. And she knows the nightmare is over. There's no love so strong as a mother's love on this earth. And her heart was just full to bursting with gratitude and wonder and overflowing joy. Or there's the man with the son, demon-possessed, a deaf and dumb demon, caused the boy to have epileptic fits. Self-destruct too, the boy had to be looked after day and night for his own protection. There was no one else to turn to. And this man brought the boy to Jesus. And Jesus, with a word, drove that spirit from the boy. What did that dad feel like? The relief, 100 tons of it lifted off his shoulder. What would we feel like if we'd been in that story and we'd been the mother or the father or been a grandparent? Or that child had been a younger brother or sister of ours? Just overflowing joy. And we share that joy. Or there's the man and the woman, the husband and the wife. His name was Jairus. They seemed to have arrived too late. Their daughter was gone, just a corpse lying on the bed, 12 years of age, the only daughter, on the cusp of maidenhood, and lying there growing cold. Already the gravedigger would be working, needs be in a hot climate. And Jesus, with the desolate parents breaking their hearts in the room, reaches with his warm hands and holds her hand. Maybe her face already becoming gray, tinged with gray. Maybe the jaw dropped open. Soon it will become waxen. Then rigor mortis would set in. But Jesus holds that girl's hands and says, young girl, young lass, young lady, get up. And first she wakes up, and then she sits up, and then she stands up, and then she walks. And the parents lost in awe and lost in wonder, probably speechless. So stunned that Jesus had to tell them to give the girl something to eat. And we're sharing their ecstatic joy together. Or maybe it's the widow of Nain. Yes, she'd lost her husband, now she'd lost her only son. No family, no emotional support, no financial support. She was on her own, she was desolate. Two processions, large processions, seemed to converge. And they had to stop, of course, when they met. And the one at the head of that other procession, her eyes would have been blurred by tears. She couldn't see clearly, I'm sure. But a kind voice said, don't cry. Might as well try and stop Victoria Falls at flood time. But Jesus, with his hand, reached and touched the stretcher bearing that young boy's corpse. And with his voice, he called that spirit back to the body. He simply said, get up. And the boy sat up and started to speak. If I was a pallbearer, I think I'd have dropped my corner and run just for sheer fear. No record of that. We don't know what he said, no record of what he spoke. maybe questions. Where am I? Where are we going? What's happening? Or maybe if I could tell you what I have just experienced. We don't know what the mother did. Maybe she nearly suffocated the boy back to death. She was so overjoyed to have him return. Maybe then down on her knees before the Savior, tears just as copious, but this time tears of joy and not of sadness. Just two more. The first, remember when there was a crowd. This probably wasn't a hyperbole. The whole town was outside the door because Jesus was there. They'd heard what he did, and they brought their sick, and they brought their demon-possessed, and a crowd will always draw a crowd. And Jesus, tired at the end of that long day, goes out to them and ministers healing to the one and deliverance to the next. And everywhere he goes, there's shrieks of delight and pandemoniums let loose, and a great wave and tsunami of joy and exhilaration. It's celebration time. This Jesus is not just a way maker, he's a joy bringer. And we're there to enjoy the celebration. And lastly, well, we need to take our shoes off our feet, really. She was brokenhearted, a heart like eggshells, smashed in smithereens on the floor. Her name was Mary Magdalene, delivered of 7 demons. She was given her life back and her self-respect back at the same time. She became one of the ladies who ministered to the men. But then it went so horribly wrong, and she'd watched him die by degrees. And now, just after the Sabbath, she came to the tomb, and the crowning blow, the body had been taken. And she's weeping her heart out in the garden. There's somebody there, and that somebody calls her by name. And nobody spoke her name like that. Rabboni, she cried, teacher. Her heart then was full to overflowing, nearly to breaking with 4 things. First was wonder, then was gratitude, then was joy, and then was love. Love. Just as an aside, we realize, don't we, that love very often grows in the soil of gratitude. Gratitude is the seedbed in which love grows. An example from our lives, if I may. 1966, the beginning of the year. We did the longest journey, it seemed, of our life. 300 miles on dirt roads in the rainy season to the northwest corner of Zambia. Government Land Rover, driver, good driver. The aim was to keep the wheels turning without them spinning. 5 of us in the cab. John, Julia, David, 3 years of age, Mike, 1. Don't bother to ask if they sat still. Eventually we arrived. It was called Mwinilunga. It's on the map because there's no other town. It wasn't a town, just a boma, within 200 miles. Yeah, and there was no tarred road and no electricity and no telephones and no normal shops and no normal services, no fresh food and no fresh milk and no doctor and no dentist and no hairdresser, which was the least of our problems. We'd never lived in bush Africa before. But there was a couple, a generation older than us, from Ulster. Their names were Darrell and Helen. They took us into their hearts and often into their home. They were so kind and so thoughtful and so good and so generous with us. And our gratitude, which for them was immense. They made such a difference to the quality of our lives. But then, as well as gratitude, we found we had a great love for them. And through that love of theirs, which softened our hard hearts, God planted seeds. And we came to love also their Savior. There's no joy like knowing that Jesus loves us and loving him in return. And remember 1 John 4:19, we love him because he first loved us. Now we're ransomed and healed and restored and forgiven. And our hearts are full of an ever-growing wonder, an ever-increasing gratitude, an ever more abounding joy, and an ever deeper love. And the best place for that love to be cultivated? When we find ourselves in green pastures, and we have time just to be with him. Prayer lists are good, but there's a time for putting them to one side. We just register his presence and enjoy him. We listen to him. We allow him to put thoughts in our minds, and we speak those thoughts out aloud. If we have the opportunity, we walk and talk with him through the park or through the countryside. And the more time we spend with him in these days where there's an opportunity to do so, the greater our love and the fuller our joy, which will have no limits. That's his joy in us by his Spirit. A moment of quiet. Father, thank you that your word says that it's the joy of the Lord which is our strength. Your joy in our hearts. We bless you for it. Amen. Now go well and don't make ageist comments. Thank you.